So welcome to the Under 16 Cancer Patient Experience Survey Workshop. This is the first of 2 workshops. There'll be another workshop in January. We'll give you a bit more information about this second event towards the end of this session. We've got quite a busy agenda today, so I'll just run through what we're covering. So we'll be starting with a talk from Samantha Luk. Sam will be speaking about their family experiences of children's cancer care. We'll then hear from Jodie Moffat at NHS England before moving on to Caroline Hancock from PICA, who will give us an overview of the national survey results from 2022. I'll then take over to talk us through the different outputs and how to navigate and interpret the data from the various outputs from the recent publication. And then last but not least, we'll have Neil Churchill from NHS England, who will close the session. Before I introduce our first speaker, Samantha, I'd firstly like to say how lucky we are to have her here. So thank you, Sam. Samantha's talk is really powerful. It's very inspiring, but it's also emotional. And some people may find this difficult. Therefore, if you feel like you need to turn your camera off for a few minutes or for the duration of Sam's talk, feel free to do so.
Okay, so here we go. So Henry's story. So first of all, though, who am I? So I'm Sam, obviously, like I've been introduced. I am a children's nurse, and I currently also work as a patient safety and quality facilitator. So I have been in the position that you are, where I've been asking people to fill out surveys, getting the responses, and getting those results. I've well versed in that friends and family test, the You Said We Did, and now obviously even more so in my current role. The PALS, complaints, the compliments, and obviously those times where things don't really go as well as you want to in the form of root cause analysis and serious incident investigation. But obviously more importantly here today, in the context of today, I'm here as a parent. I'm a mum to the 2 beautiful, I'm biased, I know, but boys, Henry and Edward, who are in these photos. And I'm also one of the newly appointed parent representatives on the Under 16 Cancer Patient Experience Survey Advisory Group. I knew I'd get that wrong. And also in that photo is my husband, Wah, who works in the emergency department as a consultant. And I felt like I had to throw something else in. So he is a cycling enthusiast, just to throw that in. So our eldest son, Henry, was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia in 2019, aged 6 years old. He underwent intensive treatment under the care of several hospitals and teams, including obviously the PTCs, POSCUs, our local children's community nursing teams, and other surrounding hospitals. He spent a considerable amount of time in hospital receiving treatment and having supportive care to help with side effects and everything else that goes with a treatment for AML. Despite having brief respites from treatment, he subsequently relapsed twice, requiring both further intensive treatment and a stem cell transplant. Tragically, he died in February 2022, aged 9 years. The experiences that Henry and we as a family have had in the years since his diagnosis, during his treatments, multiple relapses and his untimely death, much of it taking place in the chaos of the COVID-19 pandemic, were and have been life-changing. You will all know that childhood cancer affects not just the child or young person, it affects their parents and carers, their siblings, and their wider family and friends. Throughout these 15 or so minutes I have to share with you, Henry, and our experiences, I hope I can draw on some of our journey, so to speak, to bring to life the lived experience of having a child with cancer. Henry, Wah, and I, as his parents, and his younger brother Edward, had some really positive experiences, but we also had some really challenging times where we felt we weren't listened to, that people's reactions to issues that arose was potentially, in our view, slightly over the top, and times where we have felt utterly alone. A cancer diagnosis is one of the worst things you can be told as a parent. Your whole world stops, literally implodes in the moment with the sentence, "I'm sorry, the tests have shown that Henry has leukemia." Someone asked me in the last couple of weeks when they found out I was going to do this talk and speak today, why do you want to be involved in things like that? Do you think it really helps? And my simple answer is yes. For one, I have the opportunity to talk about Henry. But more than that, I'm passionate that people understand what it's truly like to have a child with a cancer diagnosis. In my nursing career, we always said, and we always continue to say, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. But the same thing here. If I don't talk about our experiences, celebrate the great things, and challenge the things that didn't go well, how will things ever improve? Throughout Henry's cancer treatments, we had multiple communications with multiple people in multiple settings, in person, via video calling, especially in lockdowns, by telephone, by letter, by email. There is so much I could write and speak about Henry's experiences, about our experiences, but I've chosen a few to talk about this morning. The first is shortly after Henry had been admitted following his diagnosis. He was unwell, nauseous, vomiting, febrile, and experiencing all the side effects of treatment. Therefore, he wasn't eating and drinking, so was losing weight. We were doing everything in our power as parents to get him to eat something, to drink, not helped by the fact that he really didn't like the hospital food. There was enormous pressure on Henry and on War and me as his parents to try and get him to eat, to get him to take the nutritional supplements too, and the medications he desperately needed. It really did feel like people were worried about wanting to intervene because we were seen as a medical family, when in fact we had always said we were Henry's parents first and foremost, and were struggling with everything that was happening. It came to a crunch point. He needed a nasogastric tube, and after voicing our concerns that we really needed to have support, interventions in the form of play therapy and the dietitian coming to try and engage with Henry were put into place. Unfortunately, by this time, Henry didn't want to talk to them, but we knew he was listening, even if his head was always in the crook of my arm. Due to needing platelets and having a temperature, the passing of the nasogastric tube wasn't attempted until early evening. I'd had to leave to pick up Edward from childcare, and with the play specialist having left for the day, it was really traumatic for everyone, especially with Henry screaming, "You waited until Mummy went home to do this." It was even more traumatic when 3 days later, he vomited the nasogastric tube out, and at that point we said no more, and that there had to be another way of at least giving his medications. After many discussions between pharmacy and the medical team, Henry was given tablets that could be crushed and we put them in yoghurt, something that maybe could have been considered earlier in this process, and it might have reduced everybody's stress levels. To be able to have elements of normality in mid-treatment was something that kept Henry and us all going, especially when we'd spent so much time in isolation to protect Henry due to the pandemic. So when it came to his 9th birthday, we were absolutely determined to do something. Henry had spent his 8th birthday in hospital following his stem cell transplant, and given that he'd relapsed for a second time, we needed to make as many memories as possible. Henry, of course, was trying to put every spanner in the works with long-term admissions and transfers between the PTC and the POSCU and vice versa. But due to the collaboration between Henry's consultant and the team at Shared Care, meant that supporting letters were written, top-ups of red cells and platelets given, and timings changed for medications meant that Henry did indeed have his day out at Chessington World of Adventures, away from hospital, accompanied by one of his very best friends and his younger brother, an opportunity for normality, to make memories. Now, this may sound a small thing, and what on earth has it got to do with today? But the amazing communication and the collaboration between the teams made this happen. We were thankful at the time, and we're almost always more thankful now following his death. Now, I said I only was going to say a couple of examples, but I had to mention this one, as it's the one that's always stuck with me and one that I've reflected on a lot, both personally and professionally. Henry required a GFR test as part of his workup for a potential second transplant. And as he was waiting at his bed space in hospital, a nurse arrived with the numbing cream so that a cannula could be inserted. This hadn't been previously discussed with Henry or with us, and Henry obviously became very, very upset very quickly, which in turn made War upset and irate. And whilst trying to advocate for Henry, the nurse decided he was being aggressive, and then lots of other people apparently piled in with their thoughts on the situation. I wasn't there at the time, but had the multiple calls from a very distressed Henry and obviously an irate husband, and then heard about it all again when they came home. Henry did calm down after things had been explained. The line was placed, the test was completed. I spoke to the matron the following day, and it transpired that the person who booked the test had forgotten that Henry only had a single lumen pick in situ, and that the paperwork given to us about the test was very ambiguous in terms of pick lines. I've reflected on this a lot because the emphasis on that day was solely that we were in the wrong. Henry and War shouldn't have reacted the way that they did, when in reality communication had been poor, and you had a scared little boy and a parent under a huge amount of stress and just trying to cope. In a professional capacity, I have reflected about why families do react the way they do at times. And the reality is that they normally are trying to cope with the most stressful situation in the best way they can. And sometimes maybe a step back must be taken to really think what it's like to be in that family's shoes. Henry also wanted to be involved in his care, obviously on his terms, but what else would you expect from a 6, 7, 8 or 9-year-old, and not least from Henry? And if there is anyone listening on here today who knew Henry during his treatment, I'm sure they would agree. I'm really sure that other parents have said to you that you become an expert in your own child, but Henry was also the expert in himself. He knew about his disease, his treatment plan, and wanted to play an active role in what was happening, where, when, as much as he was able. He made sure that he quizzed the doctors and the nurses about everything. Case in point, when he was going to start GCSF, and he asked multiple questions about what it was, what it did, how it worked. And I think we actually got down to a cellular level by the end of the conversation. But importantly, he also made sure it was very clear when he wasn't happy. Now, there's 2 examples of when Henry wanted to be involved in his care that I wanted to share with you this morning, but one provided a far more positive patient experience for him and therefore for us. Earlier, I spoke about the stress of Henry having a nasogastric tube placed during his first admission. When Henry relapsed and required a stem cell transplant, we advocated for Henry and took his lead in that having a nasogastric tube placed at the time of admission was not going to be in his best interests, due to us knowing that Henry would more than likely need it replacing multiple times a day due to vomiting and nausea. As he went through treatment and the switch to oral medication started, Henry really realised he wouldn't be able to tolerate the multiple medications and actively asked the staff caring for him for a tube to be placed when he was next having a bone marrow aspirate under general anaesthetic. Henry quickly accepted having his tube, being part of the training and obtaining his nasogastric tube passport before even I did. By staff listening to Henry's wishes and not having a one-size-fits-all approach greatly helped Henry, ensured he was involved in his care and was just one way of supporting him in having a positive experience as possible, despite what he was going through. Unfortunately, the other example is not so positive. Henry had to have an MRI scan on his shoulder, and he absolutely hated them. He more often than not silently cries whilst in the scanner, and it was absolutely awful for him and for me to watch as a parent because there was nothing I could do apart from stroke his leg. On one occasion, after already having a list of requirements to even go in the room, Henry came out the scanner and thought it was finished. It wasn't. The team needed to put dye in his line to take further imaging. Henry hadn't been aware and was absolutely hysterical. This was so stressful for everyone, not helped by someone basically saying, well, we aren't going to be able to finish it because he's screaming and he may not stay still, and carrying on in that manner. The person's tone, body language didn't help Henry or me. I spoke to Henry and got him to agree, even though he was still screaming, this time saying, just do it, over and over again. To me, at that point, it really felt as if the team was sadly dithering and were trying to decide what to do, whether he would stay still, and literally with me pleading to them, saying, please, he's saying just do it, so please, let's just do this. Henry did finish the scan. We got out the MRI as quickly as possible. And whilst I completely understood that they needed to complete the scans as safely as possible, and Henry wasn't playing ball, so to speak, I needed them to take a step back and remember that despite appearances of being cool, calm and collected at the start, Henry was a 9-year-old little boy who was now quite clearly terrified. And that if someone had told him what was going to happen, then this could have been avoided. After this incident, Warren and I spoke with his consultant, and they liaised with our POSCU team, and the next MRI scan took place at our local hospital. I'm not saying it was loads easier, but at least Henry felt more comfortable. Now, agreed plans, protocols, and everything that goes with physically treating a child with a cancer diagnosis is obviously the absolute priority. But for us, the everything else was also just as important. For Henry being able to utilise the schoolroom, the playroom, and the activities they provided, the outside space to go and play ball, tennis, and sit in the big swing with his brother or cousins when they came to visit him, to relax by having a hand and leg massage, playing board and card games with us and the staff. Henry was a whiz at cheat and normally won. Watching countless movies, to playing Roblox and Minecraft, or speaking with his friends and family over FaceTime, made part of this horrendous experience slightly easier and provided that slight bit of normality when everything else was essentially in freefall. Now, one thing we quickly realised was that the Wi-Fi was incredibly poor in whichever hospital we were in. This caused no end of arguments and stress as we tried to make the connection so that Henry and we could log on to whatever game he was playing or to FaceTime his friends whilst playing the games, or to use his no isolation robot so he could take part in his school class activities, or indeed in the later months in the second relapse so that I could log on to work and work from hospital or home. On one occasion, Henry filled out a friends and family form on his iPad, and when asked how likely are you to recommend our ward department to friends and family if they needed to similar care or treatment, he pressed extremely unlikely. And when asked why, he wrote in the free text box, because the Wi-Fi isn't very good and I can't play online games with my friends or use FaceTime to talk to them. Now, slightly taken aback by what he'd written, as he hadn't said, the nurses are great, my team's amazing. To be honest, this was what was important to him. So when I think it was a play specialist came back to him and said they'd spoken to somebody who helped sort the Wi-Fi out for the hospital or helped organise it, they'd come back with the reply that, but why do children need Wi-Fi? On hearing this, Henry ranted for about 45 minutes to the ward sister about why Wi-Fi was important. And I have no doubt that had Henry still been alive, he would have written to the various chief executives and everybody else to tell them just why Wi-Fi is important to children. Now, when Henry relapsed for the second time, it was May 2020. The world was in lockdown due to COVID-19 pandemic. And we knew that, again, Henry would be in hospital for days and weeks and maybe months, and in an even more isolated world, with no schoolroom, much reduced play activities, no volunteers, and with only one parent swapping in frequently, as we knew that good Wi-Fi was going to be essential. So while headed to the local phone shop, the provider of which we knew had worked in the various hospitals we'd been in during Henry's first treatment, and he purchased a monthly contract on a spare phone that we had. It was an added financial burden that we didn't really need or we could actually afford, but absolutely essential to help support Henry's mental health and that of Edward and of us. Never ever underestimate the power of being able to communicate freely and to be able to take a moment from reality, especially when reality isn't that great. Now, it was really important to me that as part of speaking to you this morning, that I talked about our experiences in the last few days of Henry's life. Because to me, it showed what every healthcare professional strives to do every day, to provide the very best care to children and young people and families under their care. Henry had become very unwell and had been retrieved to the intensive care unit. Even though he was incredibly unwell, he was still determined to do as much as he could himself, including getting out of bed, trying to use the toilet, negotiating numbers of ice chips, reprimanding me for daring to go and have a shower or a couple of hours sleep, and of course, discussing the dodgy Wi-Fi. 3 days after admission, I'd gone home to pick Edward up from school, knowing that we were waiting for surgeons to review Henry. And after only being gone about 3 to 4 hours, I received a phone call from Wa, telling me to return to the hospital as soon as possible, that we needed to speak to the clinical team and that it was okay to bring Edward with me. I knew then what we were about to face. I remember walking into Henry's room with Edward, and Henry being so happy to see him, wanting to talk to him and give him a hug, even though he was so desperately unwell. Now, as I was writing this talk, I asked Edward about what he remembered about going to see Henry, and he said yes, and that he remembered going to see him and that he hadn't been able to see him very much because he was always in hospital, and that he was always happy to see him when he could, but especially at that time before he died. Now, later that evening, we were taken to the same room where we'd been told about Henry's diagnosis and treatment plans some 30 plus months earlier. Only this time we were being told that they didn't think Henry would survive. The clinicians were honest, open, compassionate, and there was a small part of me that really hoped that Henry would improve. But sadly, on the Sunday, after another difficult and painful meeting, we knew that Henry was coming to the end of his life. This set in motion another process of trying to ensure that everything was done to support Henry and us. Hand and footprints of both the boys were completed. The nurse may have had to break into a cupboard to find the paint, but we weren't going to tell anybody, although obviously I have today. There may have been paint walked across the floor, courtesy of Edward, so apologies to housekeeping at that time. Edward gave Henry and himself matching tattoos, so you can see on the PowerPoint. Books were read, music played, the opportunity to have Henry baptised and just to be with him. The staff were there, but in the background, and they did everything possible to ensure our wishes were upheld, including what was going to happen when Henry died. The nurse on the day shift who cared for Henry for the past couple of days came to see us just before she left. She told us that she'd swapped her shift for the following day in case Henry survived the night, and we were really so grateful that she offered to do that for us. But sadly, it wasn't going to be needed, because our brave, kind, beautiful boy took his last breath at 9:30 p.m. that evening, the 27th of February 2022. The nurse on the night shift who'd cared for Henry on the previous shifts helped us wash and dress Henry, supported us to collect all our belongings together, and then when we were about to leave, gave me the biggest of hugs. At the darkest of times, the staff in intensive care had pulled out all of the stops. They showed us care, compassion, kindness, humanity. The care was quite simply amazing and something that I will always remember and look back on. I know that you may think that I have laboured this point, but the patient experience really just doesn't end because the child dies. In some ways, at that point, it can be even more crucial. And so my final thoughts. Communication. Communication is absolutely key. It is really the heart of everything. You will know that. I knew this on a professional level, but even more so now, having been on the other side. And also, it's not just the parents, it's also the children and the young people in the care undergoing treatment. Because having people who could engage with Henry on his level when he wanted to be involved, and therefore having him being part of his care, not having care done to him, was so important. Listen, but really listen. Sometimes what the child, young person and family member is saying is not necessarily what they really want to say. I absolutely know how hard it can be when you've got a task list as long as your arm to complete, but it really can make the difference, and it really did for us. And the small things are important, but so are the small things, and they can have just as much impact. The nurse who bought me that cup of tea at midnight when I wasn't allowed to leave the room due to waiting on COVID tests. People asking Henry about the normally massive and extremely complicated board game that he was playing. Staff educating me and him in all things Harry Potter. The clinicians who made sure to engage Henry by discussing the latest Star Wars or Marvel series on Disney Plus before starting their consultation. To the nurse who phoned through Henry's blood results and then had a chat about what had been on the TV the night before. And to those who made sure that the tooth fairy came when Henry's tooth came out on 2 different occasions. And of course to the staff who took the time out of their busy day to play those games of cheat. And finally, I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. Henry was a great believer in many things, being kind, seeing the best in every day, everything and everyone, but he also wanted to help people. And I have no doubt that had Henry been alive, he would have wanted to take part in this webinar, and he most definitely would have filled out the survey, even just to complain about the dodgy Wi-Fi. But sadly, he isn't. But hopefully, through me speaking to you just about some of his experiences of having AML and going through treatment, he will in some way be helping other children, young people and their families. Thank you.
I will now hand over to Jodie, who's going to talk to us about the NHS Cancer Programme. Thank you, Jodie.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, and I haven't posted in the chat, but thank you very much, Sam. That was tremendously powerful, and undoubtedly hearing your story, Henry's story, the family story has made a difference. And I'm sure there'll be time for us all to reflect on that and what we might be able to take forward ourselves. So I'm Jodie. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy and Strategy within the NHS Cancer Programme, and experience of care sits within my portfolio. Experience of care is really important to the work that we do. It's one of the priorities that we have within the programme to support continuous improvement in experience for everybody who is diagnosed with cancer. And our work on the under 16 children and young people's experience survey has been part of that commitment made in the long-term plan to make sure that we weren't just hearing from adults who are diagnosed, but also from children and young people and their parents and carers too. And it's been undoubtedly a tremendous team effort to get to this point. We're now in the 3rd year of having run the survey. It was developed building on the success and what we knew had worked well in the adult survey, but also, of course, recognising that cancer patient pathways, care priorities can be different for children, young people and their families than they would be for adults. And so it was absolutely vital that we worked with children, young people, their families, NHS staff, charities, other experts to form that survey. And we see this iteration now, which is absolutely tremendous. And as far as we know, world leading in gathering this sorts of information. We were really pleased that we now are in a position to be able to compare for questions that remain unchanged across a couple of data points, which is really exciting. And we're going to be hearing more on the data side of things later in the session, so I won't dwell on that now. I think from my point of view, the key thing is that not only that we gather these data, and these data are really helpful to us on a national level to understand where experience is sitting, but it's also absolutely vital that we use those data, that we review them, that we look at where there are areas of strength and things to celebrate, and where there are areas of improvement and things that could be taken forward. And with a survey such as this, there are some considerations that have to be implied with the interpretation of the data, and we'll hear more on that. But it absolutely shouldn't stop us looking at those data, seeing what lessons can be learned, triangulating with the other data that are available. In terms of how we as a team use the National Cancer Patient Experience Survey for the children and young people community, we have been able to use it to inform our Cancer Experience of Care Improvement Collaborative. And the first 2020 results really fed into the prioritisation of our 2022-23 cohort, which was looking to make improvements to experience of care for young children and young people. And we had a number of project teams co-producing with lived experience partners improvements across a whole range of different topics that meant something and were important to children, young people and their families. So that was a really positive, collaborative, and we know from the feedback from many of those teams involved that it has changed, led to improvements locally, changed the way that they approach working with lived experience partners and left a lasting legacy for them as they seek to make improvements in experience of care going forward, which is absolutely fantastic. We know from the results that people who have a pre-existing condition often report a lower experience of care than people who don't have a pre-existing condition. And so one of the things that we have been doing in this year's Cancer Experience of Care Improvement Collaborative is to bring together project teams who are seeking to make improvements in the co-produced endeavour to improve experience in those groups. And we're delighted that there is a project team which is absolutely focusing on making a difference to children, young people and their families on this space as well. So that's just an example of how we are using the results from this survey to be able to inform what we're doing, what we're able to support as a national team. And we're really excited to see how that work transpires over the coming months, and we'll be hearing more about that work in spring of next year. As I say, I won't go into the detail of the results, just to say, of course, though, that I still continue to be hugely pleased by how highly people are, on the whole, rating their experience of care. This is the children's and young people themselves, but also their parents and carers. Against a very challenging backdrop, it's an absolutely fantastic achievement for everybody out there in the NHS who is working so hard to deliver for patients up and down the country. There are, of course, as we note, things to improve on that we should all be looking at, but there is time to do that. I think we'll hear some results today. Please do go away, make some time over the coming months and see where you would like, things you'd like to celebrate and things that you think that you could also be looking to improve. And we'd love to hear how that work goes and what you've been able to take forward as a result of that work. I think for now, it just remains for me to say thank you for joining, particularly, you know, it'll be a clinic day, there'll be patients there. We really appreciate you taking this time out and really appreciate your ongoing efforts to use the results to support it happening and to crucially to use these data. I think we absolutely want to honour everyone who took part everyone who's using services now who perhaps didn't take part, but whose experience of care is also hugely important, and all of those who are going to be coming into our services, unfortunately, in the future. Thank you so much, and good to see you all again, and I hope to be back next year to hear more from you all.
Next up on the agenda, we've got Caroline Hancock from PICA, who is going to give us an overview of the national survey results. So over to you, Caroline. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Just gonna share my screen. Right, so thanks, Amy. So I'll just be taking you all through an overview of the quantitative results. So we'd like to encourage you to participate and ask questions in the chat function as we talk through the results, but we'll also be doing a question session afterwards. So I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction and talk a bit about the methodology, the respondents, and the response data before moving on to a summary of the results, where I'll go over a selection of the overall care results broken down by subgroup comparisons, then followed that by a summary of the main sections covered by the survey. So finding out about your cancer or tumour, child's care and treatment, care in hospital, care at home or school, and then finally healthcare staff. So just a bit of an introduction, the Under 16 Cancer Patient Experience Survey is an annual survey that measures the experience of tumour and cancer care for children across England. It's designed to monitor the national progress of experience of care for children who are aged under the age of 16 at the time of their care and discharge. So the survey is run by PICA on behalf of NHS England and is overseen by a very active advisory group of expert stakeholders. So overall, we have 13 principal treatment centres, or PTCs, that are included in the survey. So just looking at methodology and eligibility, so patients with a confirmed cancer or tumour diagnosis who received inpatient or day case care from a PTC aged under 16 at the time of their discharge are eligible to take part. So we send out a paper questionnaire with a cover letter invitation, and then 2 reminders are posted to parents or carers and their children with the option to complete the survey online or via telephone. We also have a free phone helpline and email for people who want to opt out of the survey if they don't want to complete it, and also we offer a translation service as well. So the questions were asked about the child's care during 2022. There are 3 versions of the survey available depending on the patient's age prior to fieldwork. So we have the one survey that's sent to parents for children aged 0 to 7 years old, then another one that is filled out by both parents and children aged 8 to 11-year-olds, and then a final 3rd survey for children aged 12 to 15-year-olds is also filled out by the child and their parent or carer. So just a few things to note when looking at the results. Firstly, that the data presented in the charts, the percentage of each scored response option is shown, and the figures have also been rounded to the nearest whole percentage and may not always equal 100%. Also to note, the question numbers relate to the numbering on the data tables and not the question numbers used in the questionnaires themselves. We also use subgroup comparisons just to allow us to explore differences in how people experience cancer care. And then also just to note, some of the groups might be quite small, so just to take caution when looking at the results for some of these smaller groups. And then finally, just a note on question scoring and the use of statistical significance testing. But there's a lot more information about this can be found in the national report and the Excel data tables, which are both available on the survey website. So you can download those and look at them at your leisure. And then just another note on confidence intervals that are used later on in the year-on-year comparisons, but I'll touch on that a bit later. And also just a note on the suppression rules. But again, all this information can be found in the national report, the technical appendix, both of which are available on the website. So now looking at the response rate for the survey. So we had 885 responses to the survey out of a total of 3,569 eligible parents and their children. So this yielded a response rate of 25%, and this is compared to the 26% response rate the previous year. And here we have this broken down responses by survey mode, with the majority of people answering by paper questionnaire. And also looking at survey type, parents answering on behalf of children aged 0 to 7 years old yielded the highest response rate. So the response rate is further broken down in the national report, and this is done by what best describes you, sex registered at birth, ethnicity, diagnostic group, stage of cancer care, and long-term condition. So I won't go into that detail now, but just to let you know that these could be found in the full national report. So I'm just going to move on to the national results now, where I'm going to start off just by talking about the overall care broken down by different subgroups. So this section shows responses to the overall care question by various subgroups. So the questions asking about overall care were structured differently for children and parents and carers. So it's just a note that those are not comparable. So for children aged 8 and over, they were asked how well they were looked after for their cancer or tumor by healthcare staff, and were given the options to answer very well, quite well, okay, not very well, and not at all well. Whereas parents of all age groups were asked to rank their child's overall care on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being very poor and 10 being very good. So just the response to the overall care by survey type. So the blue bars will always show the overall data, whereas the shades of pink represent the data from each survey or age group. So here, just looking at the overall care broken down by how patients describe themselves. So those who describe themselves as girl or female have a higher rating of care, whereas on the right, we can see that more children who describe themselves as boy or male say that they were looked after very well compared to other groups. So overall care again, so this question was asked to children and broken down by ethnic group of the child. We can see that the percentage of children reporting that they were looked after very well range from 45% for children from Black ethnic backgrounds to 93% for children whose ethnic background was not given. Then there were some differences in children's ratings of overall care by diagnostic group. So for example, those with lymphomas and reticuloendothelial neoplasms were more likely to say that they were looked after well compared to some of the other diagnostic groups. And then looking at overall care by long-term condition, we can see that parents and carers and children who reported having another long-term condition said that they received a lower level of care compared to those who reported not having a long-term condition. And then here, looking at overall care answered by children, broken down by IMD quintile, children reporting that they were very well looked after by healthcare staff ranged from 69% for the most deprived to 82% for those in the third IMD quintile. And here we have children reporting that they were looked after very well, range from 30% for those who were recently diagnosed to 83% for those in remission and long-term follow-up. Yeah, now we're going to move on to looking at a summary of the main sections covered in the survey. Like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be firstly finding out about the cancer or tumor, and then we're going to look at the results around child's care and treatment, care in hospital, care at home or school, and healthcare staff. So firstly, finding out about cancer or tumor, visiting the hospital. So 64% of parents or carers felt that they were seen at the hospital as soon as they thought was necessary after being referred by their GP. And looking at information received, overall 69% of parents or carers and children reported that information at diagnosis was definitely given in a way that they could understand. And again, overall 74% of parents or carers reported that they were definitely able to find information about their child's diagnosis. So the next section I'll be covering is care and treatment. So looking at medical history and written information. So overall, 58% of parents or carers felt that different hospital staff were definitely aware of their child's medical history. And then on the right, looking at written information, the majority of parents or carers reported that they were offered clear information about their child's treatment with an overall score of 85%. Looking at support from the hospital, so again, overall 61% of parents or carers reported that they definitely had access to reliable help and support 7 days a week from the hospital. The highest scoring from parents from the 0 to 7-year-old age category. And while overall only 57% of parents or carers felt that they definitely received enough ongoing support from the hospital after their child's treatment ended. So decisions about care and treatment. Overall, 68% of parents or carers and children felt that they were definitely involved in decisions about their child's care or their care and treatment, with scores ranging from the 0 to 7 survey being the highest at 79% to respondents from the 8 to 11 survey being the lowest with 39%. So just looking at the impact of care and treatment on schooling and education. So we can see in the middle there that across all the surveys, parents and carers reported that their child's schooling and education had been impacted by missing school due to timings of treatment and care, more so than the other response options. And then looking at things to do in hospital. So this section will be covering care in hospital. So when asked if there was enough to do, 48% of parents and carers and children felt that there was definitely enough things for their child to do in the hospital. Then for play specialist support, 53% of parents or carers reported that the hospital always offered play specialist support when they needed it. And then looking at hospital Wi-Fi, 38% of parents and carers felt that the hospital Wi-Fi always met the needs of them and their child. And this compares to the 41% who said that the Wi-Fi sometimes meets their needs, and the 22% overall who reported that the Wi-Fi did not meet their needs at all. Looking at hospital food. So more parents and carers and children reported there being a choice of hospital food. So that is it for the care and hospital section. So the next section will be care at home or school. So looking at bedside manner and trust, the majority of parents and carers and children who were seen at home by a nurse reported that the nurses were friendly. And then overall, 88% of parents and carers and children reported that they were always understood what nurses visiting their home or school were saying. So this section is about healthcare staff. So again, looking at bedside manner and trust. So parents and carers of all age groups reported positively that overall, 83% felt that they always had confidence and trust in staff caring for their child. And overall, 91% of parents or carers felt that they and their child were always treated with respect and dignity by staff. And 83% of parents and carers felt that they were always treated with empathy and understanding by staff caring for their child. And then in terms of communication, overall, 69% of children reported that they could always understand what staff were saying, with the highest score of 76% for children aged 12 to 15 saying yes always. And lastly, for this section, 71% of children felt that staff always talked to them and not just their parents or carer. So now we're going to look very briefly at year-on-year comparisons. So this section presents the 2022 scores alongside the 2021 scores, where they're comparable. So just to note that the coloured bars indicate the score and the black bars on the right show the confidence intervals, with the pink at the top showing 2022 score and the blue bar showing the 2021 score for each question. So for the first question, we can see that 78% of parents and carers and children reported that they were definitely able to have questions answered after being told about their diagnosis, compared to 84% the previous year. So however, the black lines on the right showing the confidence interval provide us with a bigger picture. So the upper and lower limits indicate the range in which the true value is likely to lie based on the information that we have. So the wider the black bars are, the greater the range in which the true population value is likely to lie, and vice versa. So in this example, we can see that the confidence intervals overlap, indicating that although the overall score is higher in 2021, there's not enough statistical evidence to conclude whether or not there is a true difference between the two. But we can still use this information, and we can see that there is an overall decrease in the availability of information for parents and carers about their child's diagnosis between the 2 years. And then also just another year-on-year comparison for healthcare staff, we can just see the overall trend that some aspects of communication and care continuity have declined slightly since the previous year. So this is my final slide. So there are a lot more findings on the year-on-year comparisons available in the full national report and the Excel data tables on the website. There's also an interactive dashboard. So just I would encourage everyone just to go to the website, download the different outputs and resources, and just go through the results at your leisure. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Caroline. I'll just give it a minute or two to see if anybody's got any questions, thoughts, reflections. Feel free to put them in the chat or pop your hand up. Meanwhile, just to summarise and sort of reiterate that what Caroline's presented is really only a snapshot of the full set of results that are on the website. I'll be talking you through the different outputs in a moment, so that will hopefully give you a feel for the amount of data that you can access and look at. And I guess from me, a main reflection is, although children and parents tend to rate their overall care as very well, we're still seeing pockets of room for improvement in things like communication, particularly communication with those younger age groups, the 8 to 11-year-olds, and some aspects of care continuity as well. Hasnim's got a question in the chat. Will you be showing us how to use the interactive dashboard? Yes, I will. And there's another question from Catherine in the chat. Are we able to compare year on year? We just issue some caution around comparisons over time, mainly based on the sort of relatively low numbers, that's particularly at PTC level, Catherine. So we give you the data, it's available in your reports, but we just sort of caveat it with, interpret with caution. I will be reflecting on that a little bit when I talk through the PTC reports in a minute as well, so hopefully that will help. Okay, so there were various outputs published from the Under 16 CPES 2022 survey. Nationally, we published a national quantitative report. That's what Caroline's just been talking through, those national results, and it looks very similar to how Caroline's slides looked, so you may have found that familiar if you've looked at the national report. Importantly, we've also got an easy read version on the website, so that's a shorter, more concise, easy read translated version of the national data. We've also got national data tables. We've got visual summaries, and we've got an interactive dashboard. I will talk you through these other outputs in a moment and how to navigate and use them. And then at principal treatment centre level, each PTC has a quantitative report on the website. Each PTC has access to data tables which allow filtering of all data by PTC. Again, I'll talk you through that in a moment. The interactive dashboard again allows filtering by PTC. And then the exception of everything's available on the website, with the exception of the PTC free text report workbook, sorry, and these were shared with PTCs on publication day directly. They're not published on the website because they contain quite specific comments from patients. So I will talk you through each of these now. The way you want to be going is this website, under 16 cancerexperiencesurvey.co.uk, and the technical reports page. I will probably navigate to that page now and talk you through the outputs on there rather than my slides. I think it'll be a bit easier, so bear with me while I find the website. Here we go. Hopefully you can all now see the website. Perhaps one of my picker colleagues can pop the website name in the chat just for reference, if that's okay, Caroline, Rasheen or Bernadine, that would be a great help. So where should we start? We'll start with the visual summary. So you've got these menus at the top, and one of them is results. There are 4 aspects of the results. The past results will give you all of the historic data from previous years. You've got 2021 and 2020 results, all available and archived there for ease of access. We've then got, sorry, I'm not going to do this in the order it's showing. I'll do the visual summaries next. So the visual summaries are a really nice, that's what it says on the tin really, a visual summary of some of the key survey results. You've got 9 different sections, so anything from overall care through to specific questions on communication, involvement, access to care, and you can click on these and it will jump to the relevant scene, so to speak. So again, as I said, it's a snapshot of some of the results, and the aim is to have sort of a layperson friendly or summary of the findings and findings we can share with children that might sort of be more engaged and interested in the results if presented this way. So that's available on the website. And then the majority of the outputs are published on the technical reports page. So to start with the National Quantitative Report, as Caroline's just presented a snapshot of data from, that's available here, and there's more information than what Caroline just presented in this report. It's quite a thorough report and contains quite a lot of info, so do take a look through that. And again, you've got the easy read version directly below it on the website as well, which is a shorter, more concise, easy read layout version of some of the key findings. We've then got the national data tables. I'll probably spend a bit longer going over the national data tables. So you've got the you've got the national data table, so that's the data obviously at the national level. Then you've got the PTC data tables. Given that a lot of you here today are from PTCs, it probably makes more sense for me to talk through the PTC data tables, but the national data tables work in a very similar way. So bear with me while it opens. Here we go. So if you click on that, it will download the data tables for you. And on here, you've got a nice guidance sheet at the start. So the guidance tab, which talks you through exactly what each sheet or tab covers, and also how to sort of interpret the scoring and understand the data. So that's all there for you for easy access. You've got the question list tab then, and apologies if this looks quite small, I'll zoom in a little bit, but this is quite helpful. As you can see actually what were all the questions in the survey, how exactly were they asked, what questionnaires did they appear on? You know, was it just the 0 to 7 survey? Was it the 8 to 11 survey? Was it the 12 to 15 survey, or all 3? Did we create a score from this question? A lot of questions we do, but some questions we don't, particularly filter questions, which are very sort of factual. Did you get a diagnosis in the last 12 months, for example? Column H asked to, this is important because you can see what subgroup of people actually answered the question. Scored text, that's the question, the text we use when we report the score. That will become clearer in a moment when I talk through scores. And then if it is scored, you can see the response options that we use to create the score. So we tend to pick the top box. So if we're asking, you know, were you involved in decisions about your child's care or treatment, or your care and treatment, the score would be the proportion of people that say yes, definitely, because that's the most optimum score, and that's where we should be aiming for everybody to respond. Picker colleagues, shout me if anybody has questions relevant to what I'm talking about, because I can't see the chat. I'll be happy to answer as we go through. About the respondents tab is again about your respondents. So you can see here you can filter by PTC. So actually, if you're from Birmingham Women's and Children's and you want to look at your breakdowns, you can see how many people, how many respondents from each ethnic group category, by gender, by sex registered at birth, responded to the survey. And again, the proportion of the percent making up the total. So as an example, at Birmingham Women's and Children's, 72% of respondents said they had no other long-term condition other than their cancer or tumour, and 25% said they did, with 3% not responding. So that's just nice because you can see the respondent profile of the respondents at your PTC in particular. You've then got the scores. So again, let me zoom in because that looks horrifically small. Again, you can filter by your PTC. You might want to look at your data, so say Elder Hay, but you may want to look at that versus the national data. So you might want to filter by national and Elder Hay. You may be particularly interested in a certain question or certain subset of questions. So you may want to select certain questions that you know you're interested in. And then you can see for each question at your trust and at a national level, how many people responded, what the score was for your PTC versus what the score was nationally. And again, the confidence interval. So as Caroline described earlier when she talked through the year-on-year data, the confidence intervals really help you to understand the level of certainty or uncertainty around the data. And we'd expect 95% of, in 95% of cases, the true value would lie between the lower and the upper confidence interval. So it gives you that sort of additional detail around your data. Year on year. So this is your historic comparisons of your data over time. Again, filtered by PTC, filtered by question, filtered by survey section, if that would be helpful. But what's most important is you've got the 2022 block of information or data here, and that sits nicely alongside 2021 for comparable questions only. Some questions weren't comparable over time. They had changes, so you won't find all questions here. Again, you've got the confidence intervals for each. Your subgroup data shows you the percent and the number of respondents answering each response option in this survey year. Sorry, due to the way the data's, we freeze the panes to make it easily more easily accessible. I can't zoom in too much, but as an example, you have a question here saying, have you been able to find the information you need about your child's diagnosis? It gives you the number and percent of people answering yes, definitely, yes to some extent, no, and this was not needed. Importantly, you've got that at an overall level, so nationally or for your PTC, depending on how you filter here. But if you scroll across, you've also got it for all of the subgroups which Caroline described earlier. So you've got gender, sex registered at birth, ethnic group, long-term condition, survey type or age group, IND, quintile or deprivation, diagnostic group, and the care or treatment stage. You can see differences and similarities in how people across different subgroups answer the questions. And then last but not least, you've got your scores. So similar to the subgroup data, but this is showing scores rather than specific data for each response option. So as an example, the percent of parents or carers who reported that they were definitely able to find information about their child's diagnosis at an overall level, and again by gender, by sex registered at birth, by ethnicity, etc. So you can see there's a lot of data here. If you ever need a hand talking through this, feel free to give us a call because there's lots and lots here. There looks loads here because it's showing every PTC data. There isn't that much for your PTC alone. But hopefully that sort of brief overview's been helpful. I'm going to flip back to the slides. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So I have just talked through these. I'm just going to flip to the PTC reports. So moving on to the PTC reports. So these are the sort of written and graphical interpretation of your results at a PTC level. They're available on the website, again, on the list that I just showed you. And they include things like background around about the survey to give context, information about the methods, and importantly, how to interpret your results. They give you information about the respondents. So you've got this in the data table Excel format, and you've also got this in tabular, in sort of tables within your PTC reports as well. So, you know, what was your overall response rate to the survey? And then how is this broken down by things like survey mode, survey type, age group, ethnicity, etc. You've then got an overall care section, which is the overall care question, how that was answered by different subgroups. So similar to what Caroline described, talked through at the start, towards the start of her talk, around how people answer about their overall care by survey mode, by survey type, gender, diagnostic group, etc. So you've got nice graphs for all of those. What you might notice is asterisks and blank data. Where you see an asterisk, that indicates that the data has been suppressed, and that would have been suppressed either to protect the identity of individual respondents or due to low numbers of respondents, essentially to preserve the robustness of the data that we show. And more information about the exact suppression rules are available on the technical appendix on the survey website. The next section in your PTC reports is your results by survey section. And again, we include a sort of snapshot of results. Not all results are in here. All results are in the data table. So please do have a look at those as well. But the data in this, the charts in this section present overall data for your PTC. So that would be the blue bar. And then alongside the data from the 0 to 7 survey and the 8 to 15 surveys combined. The reason being is there's too low numbers to often disentangle the 8 to 11 from the 12 to 15 results. In the example chart shown here, you can see that parents of 0 to 7s answer more positively than the parents of 8 to 15s. You've got 79% of parents of 0 to 7 saying they've got access to reliable help and support versus only 58% of those who are answering the 8 to 15 survey. And it indicates exactly who answered the question, how many people responded to the question underneath each chart, which is just nice added context for you. The next section in your PTC reports are the year-on-year comparisons. So year-on-year trend data is shown in charts for all comparable questions in your PTC reports. Charts display the national score and your PTC score for both 2021 and 2022 data. Again, confidence intervals are displayed, but only for your PTC, not for the national data, to show you a bit of information about uncertainty about your results. We recommend PTCs take caution when benchmarking the results against last year. Catherine, this relates to your query earlier. Or also when benchmarking against results at a national level due to likely low numbers of respondents. And we can look at a real example here. So this chart shows that at this particular PTC, 80% of respondents, in 2021, felt that staff always talk to them, not just their parent or carer. This has declined to 62% in 2022. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to click that. Also, you can see how that compares nationally. So you can see the PTC score in 2021 was better or more positive than the national score. That has switched in 2022, where the PTC score has declined. The national score's declined less. It has declined, but it's declined less to the extent where the national score is really higher than the score at this particular PTC. So for me, that would indicate something that I'd want to look into at my PTC. My score's dropped and it's below average, so that might be something that you wish to prioritise. Okay, interactive dashboard. So I'm going to flip back to the actual website here, which would probably be easier. So interactive dashboard is available on the website. So results, interactive dashboard, and a little introduction here. Click here for the interactive dashboard would take you to the interactive dashboard. This is a guide. I probably won't go through this now because I will give you a demo of how to use each page. So you've got the blue boxes, which are the menus, which are the national data, sorry, and the pink boxes are, or purple, are the PTC data. So I will focus on PTC buttons on this one for your benefit. So this one's really nice. This allows you to give a visual summary of each question for your PTC. So you can select what your PTC is. So let's pick Royal Marsden this time. You can pick sections you might be interested in, or you can just click here for the full list of questions. So if you know you wanted to look at the data on Wi-Fi, for example, or the data on asking staff questions or whatever it might be, you can see that it will give you the statistic, the image, and it will give you the number of respondents from your PTC that answered overall and how many answered to this question. What's really neat about this is that you can use this button here to download PDF or an image of this visual. So then you can use it to disseminate locally at your trust or PTC. You can pop it into presentations, or you can print it off as posters, etc. I will go to the PTC scores next. This allows you again to filter by your particular PTC. So we'll pick on Oxford this time. And it will give you a chart showing questions for a particular section of the survey. So this, let's pick care at home or school as an example. And here you've got the three questions asking about care at home or school. You've got the 2021 data in blue, you've got the 2022 data in pink, you've got the confidence intervals. We haven't shown the actual scores, the percentages on each bar, because we didn't want the charts to get too busy. But if you hover over, you'll see that it gives you the full information about each question. You might only want to look at a particular question, so you can select that. You might only want to look at a particular year, so you can select that. You might want to look at, well, I guess it will allow you to interrogate the data how you wish. And again, you can get the data to display how you want, and then you can use this button again if you want to export to PowerPoint, PDF, image, etc. And last but not least, we have the PTC breakdowns. So let's pick on Great Ormond Street this time. Let's go to a section, healthcare staff, and let's pick a question at random. Do members of staff treat you with empathy and understanding? Here you can choose to break down your results to a particular question by any of the subgroups. Again, if you wanted to know what the differences in a particular question were by diagnostic group, you select diagnostic group, and again you hover over to see the exact data points and percentages and number of respondents. You can choose to select only particular groups that you want to compare. You might only be interested in looking at two of the subgroups, so this will allow you to interact with the chart how you wish. And again, you can go back to all questions if you want to get the full list here and have a look at all questions and pick which ones you'd like to interrogate further. So I think initially, use your reports to look at the data and get a feel for your results. And then, if you've got particular questions of concern or you want to look into further, go here and then, perhaps look at how that data differs by different groups. So hopefully that's given you enough info about the interactive dashboard. I will need to move on due to time now, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end or after the session. Last but not least, well, two more things from the results side of things. You've got you've got back in the technical reports page, you've got the technical appendix, and that's where you've got the additional info about suppression, confidence intervals, interpretation, how data was analysed, etc. And then last but not least, I mentioned everybody, all PTCs were emailed a free text workbook on publication day. So NHS England colleagues are going to do a more detailed session around free text workbooks, because we appreciate there's quite a lot to cover in this session and there simply isn't enough time to go through this in detail. But just as a very brief 2-minute intro overview, hopefully you've all been able to access your workbooks. You've got a cover sheet. You've got guidance notes to show how to interpret your data. You've got a description of all the subtopics, so all of your free text data has been coded into a topic, so and then given a subtopic as well. So these are the descriptions of what the subtopics are and how we categorize those comments into the topics. This report sheet's really nice because it allows you to say, actually, I'm really interested in what my patients and parents were saying about a particular topic. So I'm going to pick on care quality here. And just to reiterate, this is a demo report. This isn't a particular trust report. So you can see actually 20 comments related to care quality. Let me zoom out a bit. And of those, here's who wrote those comments. So you've got, parents when they were asked, was there anything good? You've got children when they were asked if there was anything good, and then the negative comments as well. But it also gives you this subtopic breakdown as well. So actually, of these 20 comments that relate to care quality, 4 were gratitude related, 8 were general comments on care, 4 were about efficiency of care, and 4 were about care continuity. And what's even nicer, if you scroll down further, is that you get then all of the questions filtered for those 20 comments are then in this table here. So again, really valuable data. Do have a look at this, and you've got various other sheets where you've got the full data set where you can filter by your different topics over here. That's not, this is the one, so where you can filter by topic or subtopic, so you want to see all comments in a different way. So that's probably all I'll say about that, and I'll let we'll follow up with a more detailed video in due course once it's available. Okay, back to my slides. Okay, that summarises the overview of your different outputs. I will just come on screen share for 2 minutes before I move on to next steps. Do we have any? We've probably got 2 or 3 minutes for questions before I cover next steps and then pass to Neil for close.
Thanks, Amy. Wendy has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. Hello, Wendy. Feel free to come in.
Hi. I have a question, and it's going to sound a bit sad, but you're going to have to work with me on this. So I'm from St George's, and we're a joint PTC with the Royal Marsden, and I think we've got, as a whole, about 25% response rate, which I think is pretty the same as everybody else. Anything is, I get really miserable looking at these scores, because you give a PTC breakdown, and like 300 of the scores will be attributed to the Royal Marsden, and like 27 will be attributed to St George's, even though we're a shared PTC. And I wonder, when the care is split at different points between George's and the Royal Marsden, how the Marsden always end up with a much larger number of responses attributed to them. Does that make any sense whatsoever? Because I feel quite miserable looking at my data, because I'm going to go back to George's and go, yeah, less than 30 people commented on the care at George's, when all cancer care will be going through St George's. But it seems that so many more get attributed to the Marsden. And I just feel a bit miserable when I look at these scores, because it looks like George's have had very little people respond, when actually, as a whole, it's the PTC as a whole, and the care would have been shared between both organisations. I'll stop talking now.
That's okay, Wendy. Thank you. It's a good point, because you're one of 3 shared care PTCs involved in the survey. So, yeah, I mean, children will tend to answer based on their overall experience of care. We're asking about cancer care over the last 12 months, but we do ask them to specify, to ensure the data's actually, we can attribute their responses to a particular place of care. We do ask them to answer about a particular hospital. So that's the hospital which we name on the covering letter that we send them when we send them the survey invite, and that's based on, you know, how we get the sample from the trust, from the PTC, how we deduplicate, because of course we want to make sure that somebody who's received care at both hospitals doesn't receive two surveys, because they're less likely to respond. We can try and pull out the results if there's 30 for I think you said 30 for St George's. If we can try and pull out the results or a site report for you, so you can see what the data set for your site only. That would be something we'd be happy to follow up on, but just to caveat, you probably get quite a bit of data suppressed, because where you've got filter questions and fewer people answering, it may reduce your numbers somewhat. Have I gone any way into answering your question or reassuring you there?
Yes and no. I think with shared PTCs, I think it's complicated, and I think I've always wondered about this, because obviously St George's and the Marsden will likely be pulling the same sample of patients for both. Do you know what I mean? Because the patients will be split between them and they'll come back and forth. So I somehow can't work out, unless it's something as simple as, if it's the patient's last stay was at the Marsden, is that the one that they're more likely to respond about?
Right.
It just feels really. I'm 100% certain that the 271 people who've put down that Marsden would have had quite a bit of their care at St George's. So I don't feel assured that it's. And it's just, if we go back and do a whole action plan now on 27 questionnaires for St George's, that doesn't feel right, when a much, much bigger part of that care would have taken place at St George's and the Marsden. Do you know what I mean? So I probably
do, Wendy, and that is the way we do duplicate based on the most recent episode of care. However, we do also cognitively test the surveys with children, so we're currently thoroughly testing the surveys for the next survey round, and we do test for, you know, interpretation of shared care, and because a lot of people have shared care at sort of POSCUs as well, so wider than this survey. So we do sort of question and follow up with people about how they're interpreting that and how they're answering. So hopefully that provides you with some reassurance there. But, you know, a child is probably going to think about their care more widely when answering some of the questions. But we're doing everything we can to make sure that actually, you know, by reminding them on the survey itself, we keep reiterating that they need to be answering about the place in the letter that came with their questionnaire. If you'd like to follow up about the site breakdown specifically as well, though, then do let me know, because I think it probably would still be valuable, Wendy, to have a look at that. I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to move us on because we've got 4 minutes left. I've got 1 or 2 more slides to cover before I hand to Neil. So I appreciate we may go a couple of minutes over 11:30. So if people do need to drop off for another commitment, please feel free to do so. I will quickly flip. I just wanted to cover next steps. So what's happening next is we're currently testing the 2023 surveys. We need help with finding people, so I'll come on to that in a moment. Importantly, we've got a second workshop. We will be holding that in January this year rather than trying to squeeze another one into November. That will be the 24th of January, and my colleague Caroline will send more details to you very soon about that and how to sign up. We are starting to prepare the sampling for the next survey. We'll be releasing sampling instructions very soon. We'll be holding a sampling webinar on the 10th of January 2024 to support your sampling. Again, Caroline will send further details and a registration link in the next week or so. We really need some help in finding children with cancer to help us with cognitive testing. This requires about an hour of their time, generally on a Teams call or a video call, to test the survey questions, check they still work. A hugely important process to make sure actually the data that comes out at the other end is as robust as possible. If you have any capacity to share our advert with children, please do, with children and parents. We are testing until January, sort of mid-January, so any help you can do with disseminating the advert over the next couple of weeks into early Jan would be hugely appreciated. And again, we can share with you the adverts if you'd like to have a copy. And there's a £60 voucher to thank people for their time. Finally, on response rates, so just a note that response rates have declined over time for the last 3 years of the under 16 CPES survey. You can see here 35% in the first year, and it's dropped slightly over the last 2 years. Well, there's various reasons for this, which we're looking into, but in the meantime, we're putting together a range of actions which we hope will have an impact on response rate and encourage people to take part. So, for example, we've designed a set of communication and publicity materials last year. We launched that at a webinar before fieldwork each year to help people support survey publicity and encourage people to take part. For the upcoming survey, we're also introducing a child-friendly leaflet to go into the survey mailing packs to further engage children. And we are exploring having a translated page on the survey website to have information available in languages other than English. If you have any ideas in terms of how else we can improve response rate, please do let us know, drop us a line, pop thoughts in the chat, because we'd really welcome your ideas, your thoughts. Thank you. Again, just popping, I'll pop a screenshot in the chat in a moment of things to think about before the next workshop, so we can sort of become adequately prepared to cover what you need to cover. Sorry to rush those last few slides. I'm going to hand over to Neil to close out the session now, so thank you, everyone.
Sorry, Amy, before we move on, I think Louise,
Yes.
you had your hand up.
Oh, hi, Louise.
Oh, hi there. Just a really quick question. I'm trying to look at the data. Is there a lot of variation between sites about response rate? I just wonder whether at the next workshop people might be able to share some approaches if there are places that have much better response
I think
rate.
there's a bit of a range, Louise, in terms of response rate by PTC. So we're looking at putting together response rate reports for the next workshop. So you can see more of a breakdown and we can look at the range. But yes, I think it's a really good point. We're trying to get feedback from those with a better response rate to see if they can share, what they're doing locally. Maybe they were better at sharing some of the comms and publicity materials. We just don't know yet. But
I think sometimes I think because things come out from another source, it's about the link with the treating team encouraging families to take part, and whether there's some organisations have a much closer relationship between the part of the organisation that sends out the survey request and the people who might be able to support families to take part. That sort of thing might make a difference. I don't know.
Thanks, Louise. I think we'll be keen on exploring more, so feel free to send us any other suggestions or we can have a conversation. Thank you. Neil, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. And hello, everyone. I'm conscious we're right at the end, so I'll be brief. My name is Neil Churchill, Director for People and Communities at NHS England. Our role, our mission really is to improve the quality and equity of care using insights and ideas from people and communities. There's always insight, isn't there, in listening to a story, but it's not often you hear from someone who has experience as a parent and experience of how the NHS works. And there was so much wisdom in what Sam was sharing with us earlier. I know we've been reflecting on that today. I just want to bring it back to some of those points in relation to the fact that people's experience of care matters. It's not just the big moments, but it's also the small things that make a big difference. And the things that we can do to create elements of normality in people's care, particularly for children and young people. And I think also just a reminder that you always learn something new from listening to children and young people. And sometimes we learn surprising things. And much of what we heard, I think, is in our influence, some of it not directly in our influence. I think I saw some of the comments in chat about what we can do about Wi-Fi, and Jodie, that might be something that we can take away with colleagues nationally to see what we can do to try and accelerate the arrival of better speed Wi-Fi. But just in the context, I think that the years in which this survey was conducted were obviously years where there was quite a lot of pressure on NHS services, and we have seen some reductions in many of the surveys that we've seen. So it's very interesting to see here that where there have been improvements year on year in the results, it's really a result of hard work, and it shows that hard work does make a difference. So I think there's things to celebrate, but there's also things that we know we need to do. to improve. I mean, two things just to call on you to do, which I know you'll be doing anyway, but the first is just to put this data alongside other data and other conversations that you're having. It's really important to talk to parents, to talk to users of services, to talk to staff about what this is saying and what they're learning from different sources. And those conversations are incredibly valuable in helping us to reach insights and identify the things that matter most to people. So we're working on the things that make the biggest difference. And secondly, to involve people with lived experience in that improvement work itself. And we often hear from people that some of the ideas that people with lived experience will come up with will be easier, simpler, cheaper to introduce than some of the things that we might think about ourselves. So there's a huge amount of benefit from having those conversations, working out what matters most, and involving people in that improvement work. I just want to say a big thank you for all you do to improve the experience of care for children and young people and their families and carers. We know there's more to do. And I was struck again by something else that Sam said, which is that Henry would have filled in this survey. And we know we've got a responsibility to act on what we hear from this survey and to tell people what we've done as a result. So if you can come along to the next workshop on the 24th of January, which is focusing on how do we improve, it's not just about what we can do in individual services, it's what we can learn from each other. So it's been really valuable. Thank you very much for giving the time to be here today and for all that you do to improve care. And I know we will be reflecting on Henry's story and what we've learned from Sam as we go forward. But I hope to see many of you in January.
Thank you, Neil. Just last but not least, Caroline has just posted a feedback form. If you have any time, we would really appreciate your feedback on today's session because we are keen to learn how we can improve and make these sessions as useful and engaging as possible for you going forward. Again, thank you to all the speakers for their time. Thank you for everyone attending and hopefully see you on the 24th of January, if not before. Thank you.